Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the London WebFest Q&A panels. These are our January sessions for the 2021 season. As always, I'm Saul Marin. I'm the festival director here at London WebFest. Now, today's panel is titled Sound Design in Film. We're joined by our January guest judge and feature film sound designer, Phil Lee. Phil's work has covered the gamut of the Hollywood studios, from Paramount to Universal, Fox Searchlight. He's a very busy man indeed. Now, joining Phil, we have two of our London WebFest December winners. Drew Hawley is the sound designer from our Best Short Film category for Can You See Me, a short film directed by Christian Elliott and Bruce McDonald. And then last but not least, we have Leah Marie Puffenberger, who, aside from having one of the world's most fantastic names, won the Best Sound Design Award in December for her amazing work on the short film Mazloom, directed by Mariam Khalid. Now, I can't wait to bring them in and just show them to you in just a moment. We have a whole heap of questions to put to them. And don't forget that you can also pose your own questions by adding them to the chat below. Now, before I introduce you, I think it's only fitting that we see a little bit of their work.
Is it Dr. Bradman? Or perhaps one of his less fortunate patients? Mrs. Bradman? Mrs. Condamine? Oh, behave yourself, Maya. Mr. Condamine? It appears that someone wishes to speak to you, Mr. Condamine. Do you know anyone who has recently passed over to the other side?
Only my old literary agent, but it's unlikely he'd make contact. He died owing me a fortune in royalties.
Chavata, what did they give you?
I saw this hanging around their house. She said to put it in the corner of the room for protection against the bad spirits.
Bad spirits. Come on, man.
It's interesting, na? कहाँ लगाएंगे? Zara, गाड़ी में मत लेकर. You'll get car sick again.
Aló, sí, buenas. Yo soy el tío de Miranda, de la niña. Le estoy llamando porque la niña no ha llamado.
Oye, estaría demasiado orgulloso.
Ah, ¿está trabajando?
No te preocupes por nada, de verdad. Todo perfecto.
And as promised, here they all are. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Hi.
Hi, Saul.
How you doing, Phil? Leah,
very good.
Drew, you are currently unmute you. Oh, there we go. Fantastic. Thanks so much for joining us. How is everybody doing this January?
Very good.
It has been,
inside.
Yeah. I mean, Phil and I are both in London, so we're in lockdown currently. Drew as well, obviously.
Yes.
It's a unique time to be around, but hopefully it means there's more work happening indoors. So we just want a friendly chat today, just talking through the work that you've done yourselves, the work that's been part of London WebFest, and just for people at home, kind of getting to know a bit more about you and a bit more about the work that you do. I think really, if we just start, Phil, we'll start with you. If you could just introduce yourself and give us a little bit about you.
Yeah, sure. I work as a sound designer and sound effects editor and sound supervisor as well on mainly on feature films based here in London. I've been working in the industry for about 10 years now, maybe nine or 10 years since I first started as being freelance. I went to Edinburgh University to do a sound design master's MSc in 2009, 2010. That was my kind of career change at that point. I've been on various career paths, from being a musician to being working in the wine industry as well at one point. but now back on doing stuff with sound. And yeah, so basically I went back to uni to retrain, and then ended up, just making my way into the industry by just doing lots of short films to start, really. Lots of free stuff, lots of free work, lots of just working with as many different people as possible on a bigger and on the biggest kind of eclectic mix of movies I could possibly do, and then ended up coming down to London from Edinburgh, and I've been down here about 7 years now.
Fantastic. I love that deviation quickly into the wine industry and then back to sound design. It's just a natural career path. Like,
I know, tell me about it.
I did my interning in the wine industry, as we all do, then back to sound design. Drew, how about yourself? Oh, you're muted again.
That would help, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Let us hear your voice, Drew.
Aha, there we are. My career started, I guess, I was a musician. I was a young musician. I was a drummer. And I got into, I was very much into soul music and hip hop. And, I grew up in the 70s and the 80s. And I got into beat making. So I became like a bedroom DJ and beat maker. And that was kind of like my entrance into the music world. So I was working with rappers, and then slowly went on to singers. And then I decided that I needed to kind of work on my skill as an engineer, because I didn't want to have to keep relying on engineers to record the material that I was working on. So I did some sound engineering courses, some music production course, and then sort of quickly moved on to starting my own recording studio, which was 20 years ago now. And here I am today. I work with many different. I'm like, my background is mainly music, and I sort of got into, I guess, making music for short films and doing the sound design and the mixing and all of that. So I sort of became like an all-in-one person to go to. So my work is quite varied across media and music.
Yeah, for those of you who might not know, as well as being now an award-winning, sound designer for film, Drew has also been a UK Hip Hop Award winner for his production, and has also been nominated for the Mercury Music Prize.
Wow.
So there's definitely, there's a wide array of. I like to say you've spread yourself thin, but you've obviously still not thin enough, because there's talent in all the sections. It's fantastic.
I guess kind of being in the UK as a kind of like, I started off as an urban producer with a studio. I kind of I felt like I needed to do everything or learn how to do everything, and rather than kind of master of all trades, it's a jack of all trades, master at none. I've kind of tried not to spread myself too thin, but I've definitely worked on each area and tried to just really push myself.
It's quite interesting. We'll come back to that point in a second. Leah, if you tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Leah. I actually got my degree in London. I studied at SAE, School of Audio Engineering. I lived over there for about 3 years. Came home. I actually tried to stay in London, and just due to the visa situation, couldn't. But it's fine. It kind of was a blessing in disguise, because I got home and I interned at several different studios and landed a great job at Crawford Media, who is a post-sound house here. I freelance for Moonshine Studios here as well. So this past year and a half, maybe 2 years, I've gone freelance, and I absolutely love it, because it just gives me a little bit more freedom, creativity. It allows me to work with my work schedule a little bit more. And I'm also an artist. I do music as well. My background is very similar to Drew, as I think a lot of sound engineers are. I started in music. I'm a singer-songwriter, play a little bit of a lot of instruments. And I did the same thing. I got into engineering because I wanted to be able to record my own music. So you know, naturally that kind of opened a lot of different doors. Once I did audio engineering, I was able to do a lot more in film. I did location sound for a bit, and then I think majority of my work is falling into the Foley category right now. I'm doing a lot of Foley. I don't know if it's just because the demand for Foley artists are a little bit higher. I'm not sure, but I love it all. And as long as I'm working in sound, I am super happy all the time. So yeah.
So, I mean, coming back to what you were saying before, Drew, I suppose the question for everyone, and some of it's already been answered, but what was the turning point to getting into sound design or to getting into music production? Because, Drew, you were talking about that kind of relying on other people to do something to getting to the point where you learn to do it yourself. We talked with producers, we talked with people who work on both sides of the lens last month. And it was, you know, when you're suddenly putting on all the different hats, but you're learning these new skills because you're either put into a situation where that's necessary because there is no funding and, you know, a lot of the time in short film, or you're just like, do you know what? I can do this. I can learn this. So do you remember a point when you were like, oh, actually, this is how I got into sound design, or this is how that started?
Well, I mean, for me, it was quite simple. My wife is in advertising, so she, whenever there was an opportunity, really sort of early on when I was, you know, when my studio had just started and she got back into doing, I mean, she's been in advertising for many years and worked with big clients, and I'm always like, can't you get me in? They were like, no, they use their you know, they use their people in Soho and that's it, and they, you know, and then, but you know, I would get asked to do maybe the odd demo or pitch for something. And you know, eventually there was some opportunities for some kind of maybe smaller jobs, and that was my kind of training ground, if you like, and my foot in the door to just kind of give it a try and give it a shot. I didn't really have any idea or, you know, kind of set formula like, oh right, so what do I do? You know, I just kind of used my ears, and you know, I didn't train to kind of go, oh right, now I do sound design. You know, it was just kind of like, okay, what do I do? Okay, I look at the visuals and I you know, see what's going on, and then, you know, maybe use some references, and you know, you work with the directors and the editors, and you know, you just trying to, you know, kind of work towards, and that was how I got into it. It wasn't, you know, it was kind of like, oh, there's an opportunity, right, let me try that, and it's great, I can get paid for it as well, you know. So that was how I got into it, you know, aside from the music, you know. Or it might have been a job which came up where they needed some composition for it. Oh, can you do sound design as well? Yeah, I'll give it a go. You know?
That age-old thing of just say yes and then work how to do it later.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, that is the best way to get going, really, is you've just got to cover all bases. And as you were saying, Leah, as well, even being location sound recordist, I've done all that as well. And that really helps as well, just to get every feather on your cap to start, and then specialize then later on. You know, that's generally, I think that's how generally career paths work in sound. So yeah, you just narrow it. But just knowing, having that experience is invaluable, and just knowing how the film industry works and how everyone interacts, and you know, there's like hundreds and hundreds of people work on a movie, you know. Well, bigger when they get bigger, but even on smaller movies, it's, you know, there's a lot of people involved, a lot of different ideas, a lot of different hats, a lot of different experience, and it's what you bring to the table as well which is what's so fascinating about sound. I think it's so personal. What you think sounds good sounds completely different to someone else. It's not something you teach. That is just your natural creative brain, the way your brain works, the way your brain interprets sound, and the way we all interpret sound is so different. The way we verbalize sound, the way we describe sounds. You know, when you do a sound library, you compare two different sound libraries, and then each sound designer will have different names for each of their sounds, you know, and directors will have different names. What they're, you know, when they're trying to explain what they want from you, you know, it'll be There's so it's, you get so much stuff thrown at you, like I want it more wiggly, I want it more, that, and that's the kind of words you get. And you go, okay, so they said that, but they mean this in my brain. So that's a skill you will learn as a sound designer, is how to interpret what the director wants. And
I think that's good for any kind of anything within the business, be it actor, producer, whatever.
Yeah.
First AD, anything. Just how do you interpret what the director's actually trying to tell you? Getting to know their second language almost. You're like, oh, so that's what squiggle means. Okay, fine. That's your version of what a whoosh is. Okay, great.
Yeah, exactly. So, which is what's so great about the industry we work in. And it's so exciting. Every single job's completely different.
Absolutely.
And Leah, what about yourself? Is there anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you guys were saying. I mean, especially when you said wiggly, I had somebody say, I need it more orange. And I'm like, oh, okay, what does that mean? And you just kind of have to, and it's all relative, it's art. So you can, do something that you think sounds amazing. It's not what the director wanted. And then you kind of have to be like, all right, well, it is my artwork, but this is not what they want. So what do they want? And getting those references, I think, are super important, and figuring out, being on the same page is just comes down to communication. So I think that's the biggest thing, and really being able to talk to the people on your team and supervisors and whatnot, and just it comes down to communication. It doesn't mean it's bad work. It just means communication.
Yeah, that can be said for editing, or for, again,
anything.
Being an actor, like what you've created, what is, you're working on somebody else's project, but what your interpretation of that, for someone to come along and go, it's not what we're after. You're like, oh, okay, well it's fine. I'm not hurt by it, but what is it exactly you're after? And taking from what you said, Phil, that kind of, everybody has a version of their own sound. Everybody has their own. How have you found that to be, as you've progressed, all of you, in fact, that mix of what's, I suppose, classed as mainstream enough that that's definitely within the ballpark of what a director's after, but also still encapsulates who you are as a sound designer? How do you find balancing that when it comes to creating something? Because I'm sure there's many sound designers out there who have weird and wonderful ideas, but whether or not that's going to get them work in that, for something that still needs to be a sellable commodity, I suppose.
Yeah, of course. And it's, I suppose, following on from what we were just talking about, it's also about losing your ego and putting your ego aside. And this isn't your movie. The director could have spent the last 8 years on this film, and all the people involved. So it's getting over yourself, and that is quite a thing that you do learn early on. So it's getting that balance right of introducing your own style and what your thoughts are, but also it's a collaboration. And whenever we get to the mix at the end of the process, and usually the director's heard bits and bobs, but when we come to the final mix, there's usually been a good 6 or 7 weeks of work that they've not heard, and we're in the mix room, and then we're all kind of, it's a collaboration, and it's a conversation, and you just learn to gauge that from your question, Saul. You learn to gauge what works and what doesn't work. I don't know. There's just no more than experience, really. It's just experience. It's, I tried that in the past, and I tried to do some wacky stuff, and to me, this sounds amazing. And it's funny once you get it into the theater and watch it with everyone else, because you're trapped in your room and you're doing this a lot. You're on your own a lot. You're not really getting much feedback. So the first point of real feedback is the mix, and then it's exposed, and then you get to a point where you go, oh, okay, now I'm in here and with people, and there's that, it changes the dynamic completely. And then you suddenly go, oh, okay, maybe I was a bit bold there, and maybe this and that. So, but that's again more experience, and you just kind of, it's just something you learn. Yeah, that's all I can say really about that, the experience wise. Yeah.
And as for the rest of you, where do where do you start? Because you were saying getting to the end of like the mix that you then show everybody. But when you're starting a new project, like how do each of you start? It feels like an overwhelming kind of like, do you build your own sound libraries? You're talking about doing Foley work, Leo. Like, how tell me, how do you start? What's your process?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I always love creating my own sounds. I think that's super rewarding. Now, it really just depends on budget and time crunches in the end, what kind of project it is. So a lot of, depending on what I'm working on, it's such a it varies so much from project to project, But I am fortunate to have studios where I can go and record different samples and have my whole Foley library. So, but I do. Yeah, the hardest part is, I think, getting started. But I think, after that communication with the directors and the sound team, knowing what direction you're going in, having your references, I think that's the most important part of getting that part started. So you just, okay, I know what page they're on. I know what I can do now. I have some ideas now. Let me just put it out. Let me just dive in, and then start it and then see where it goes.
Andrew, what about yourself? How do you begin a project, I suppose?
Pretty much the same, really. Like it's obviously it's different from project to project, but with the films that I was involved in with Christian, that I had a bit of a template from the editor, like he who was also the director, and he had like an idea of where he wanted certain sounds to go. So I was like, okay, great, I've got a bit of a reference there. And he's like, look, I need, add something here, add to the existing sounds. And it was just kind of like, so what I do is if I have a template, great, then I just start building layers. If I don't, then I just, I just work off the brief. I, work off of references, and just keep just kind of keep building layers, depending on, like I've got a bit of a process to how I do things. So if I'm sort of doing a mix and doing some sound design and some composition, in that case, I didn't do the music, but I was mixing and I was dealing with all the dialogue as well, which needed so much cleaning up. So I literally just spent, a kind of couple of days just literally going through every piece of dialogue and making sure it was the right level. And then once I had that, I was like, okay, let me take away, almost take away the dialogue and just work on, the next layer, which was the kind of sound effects and the atmospheric stuff and the sound design, So, like Leah said, it was it's pretty much like depending on project to project. But on that one, I kind of build it up in layers and then keep going back to, is this okay? Does that work? Yeah, that's sounding great. Can we add this? Can we change that at this second here? And it's just, you just keep working and pushing to get everyone happy.
So for anybody who may not have seen it, Can You See Me, which Drew worked on, is from Christian Elliott and Bruce McDonald, and it's about the sex trafficking trade, and it is a wonderful piece, but overwhelming. As with Leah, she won Best Sound Design for a film called Mazlum, which tackles basically paedophilia, and it's both wonderful pieces, but both quite difficult to watch. And I remember thinking, whilst watching them, I can't even imagine what that must be like to work on, over and over and over again. I don't know about yourself, Phil, if there's something in your back catalogue that you've worked on like that. But for the three of you, how do you deal with subject matter like that? And when you're watching and helping building that story, because obviously the end result is very emotive and hits you hard. But how is that on a day-to-day basis? Do you switch yourself off and it becomes a task? Or is it just learning to separate yourself, from that?
Okay. I guess from I'm trying to think of what I've worked on that. I've probably nothing quite as you know, I haven't done many documentaries or that kind of style of, you know, social realism or, you know, those kind of movies I haven't worked on really. So, but I do find that there's some very heavy stuff I've worked on, like very kind of experimental art house movies that can be quite intense, certainly, to work on. I'm actually doing one at the moment. It's an art house horror film, and it's a really great movie. Really enjoy it, but it's a lot of brain power and a lot of concentration and emotional, emotional. From me, a lot of emotion comes up from me when I'm sound designing it. So it's I have at the end of the day, I take about an hour after I've finished, and then I have to just sit down and not listen to anything, silent generally, chill out, and then just very much. I've learned over the years to separate work and my normal life, because it can bleed into each other so easily. Like, I don't work weekends ever unless there's a project that
is an amazing skill to have. That is how you yeah
I don't. I used to, and I don't anymore, and I make a point of that. So I literally do maybe longer hours in the week, but unless I have to, unless there's a really bad deadline, I won't work weekends. That's certainly something that I stuck to now for the past few years. And yeah, it's just like, but even now with lockdown, and I have my studio at home anyway, so lockdown wasn't so much of a change in the sense of work. So but very much keep it. I never come in my studio when I'm not working. I don't come in here to do anything else other than work. Keep it very separate. And yeah, but yeah, it's so easy to get so engrossed in something you're working on and become, you know, very involved with it. So yeah, it is quite difficult to separate those two worlds sometimes, especially like, sounds like the films you guys have worked on have been pretty intense experiences, I'm sure, as well.
Did that have an effect on the two of you? Were you able to separate yourself from that, or did you find it a different process than normal?
Well, I think for me, like, you almost have, like, I mean, you know, like Phil said, you know, it's taking a break when you need to, you know, because it can be quite emotionally draining, you know, but it's also remembering that actually they're acting and they're working towards, you know, bringing light to something that's going to, you know, do some good, you know, and, you know, as long as you kind of keep that in the forefront, you're like, okay, this is what it's going to do, and it's, you know, it's to, you know, it's to bring light to people who don't know about trafficking.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's kind of how I saw it, you know, and yeah, you know, you just, I guess, because you're looking at, you know, the sound in different layers, you know, I mean, on the films that I was working on, there was, you know, there were screams, and there was like lots kind of flash edits as well. But, you know, there was nothing too revealing at the same time, even though, you know, the message, and you know that actually what's going on in that movie is completely wrong, but it's just bringing light to something. It's just bringing it to the surface, basically. But yeah, you know, I mean, I worked on those at home in this very space here with my monitors and, you know, my setup. And, you know, it was a very strange time, because we'd just gone into the first lockdown. So it was about coming almost a year ago. And, you know, I got two daughters, and they weren't at school. You know, they were at home, and, you know, my wife was kind of homeschooling them. And then every now and again, they'd, you know, I mean, I was working with headphones anyway, but, you know, because I've got my two monitors, I've got my, you know, my visual on one monitor, and my, you know, my door on another. You know, I'd have the girls coming in like, Daddy, what you you doing? You know, and I quickly switched the screen, you know, because, you know, it's just not appropriate. But, you know, I just made sure that I just took regular breaks and just kind of just removed myself from it, and then came back to it and just, you know, treated it as, you know, you can't get too emotionally involved in it in that respect.
Yeah, it does sound like when you're working on something, you, especially if you're, I mean, you're building the world of it yourself, you're helping to be one of the creators of it. So I think if you're able to lock yourself into that aspect of your work, it's not until the rest of us see the whole project, you know, we see the finished work, that everyone's done their job incredibly well, because it's we're the one who's being hit by it. What does, just moving away from that, what does research look like to the three of you? You know, like, where do you get inspiration from? You know, do you watch films? Do you take notes? Like, what's your, if you're based like have a new project, what's your version of research when it comes to, you know, prepping for a new project?
Yeah, well, it's we'd always do a spotting session with the director first. That's our generally the first thing before we even get the, well, I'd probably get the film a couple of days just to have a watch, and then make some of my own notes myself and have a meeting with the director then, and then we get into their head and what they're after from us. And so, yeah, that would be the first thing to do. So then taking from that, yeah, it's basically researching whatever whatever the film is entailing, really. So, for example, I've got a film starting in Mauritius. I filmed in Mauritius, which is starting soon. So had a meeting with the director last week, and so it's I'll be having to build the world of, you know, the researching the birds and the wildlife, and, you know, the general what Mauritius would sound like. It's based in 1930 as well, so there's that kind of idea of trying to build a, you know, as realistic environment as you possibly can, really. So certainly start with that, and then, you know, researching, you know, maybe there's like 1920s cars in it as well, so you'd have to research the car and find out, you know, get something in the ballpark at least that's going to represent that correctly. And yeah, so they're just the kind of things. Each project's completely different, so researching what the director's done before. I'd usually watch their previous films as well. Yeah, that's pretty important as well. So, just to get a feel for what they've directed in the past if you've not worked with them before. So that's pretty important as well, I find. Yeah, so that's probably one of the main things I do.
Leah, what about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, what Phil said, and I think generally speaking, in just improving sound design in general, I love animation films. I love them. I think there's just so much sound space and creative everything that goes into animation in general. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I'm a big fan of Sound Collective. They have sound designers and music composers, and people come on and actually they'll go through a film and talk about how they made certain sounds. And that just always fascinates me of you know, where they take their sounds from. And I think after being a Foley artist and in it, a lot of things come down to material. It doesn't necessarily exactly have to be what exactly you see on screen. So, you know, for example, I think Jurassic Park, they were, you know, how they had those big globes that they were rolling around in. Yeah. They had tiny glass balls that they were like rolling around, creating this like whooshing sound with, that they were creating design with too, to get that bigger sounding. And it's just like little things like that I just find so fascinating, that it's like, it's not literally what you see on screen, obviously, but you know, where do you find those sounds? How do you get creative and make it convincing to people that you know, that is the sound that they're hearing, you know?
I think the general public will be amazed constantly when the juxtaposition between what you're seeing on screen, someone being chopped to bits, but you're using a cabbage in when recording to get just that kind of difference between what's horrendous to see, but the kind of humorous kind of behind the scenes. Speaking of which, Leah, you've worked on the new series of Creepshow, is that right?
Yes.
Were you a Foley artist on that?
Yes.
How was that? Because I am, old school B-movie horror lover. So the idea that it's come back and it's come back in a series form. Can you tell us just about your experience on that and what you were doing and just an overall effect of it?
Yeah, this was an incredible experience. Especially working in horror for Foley was just so fun because the amount of like creativity that goes into horror films for sound design and Foley was just a blast. And they had so many cool monsters. They have a stick monster in there at some point. So I got brought the whole forest into the studio and was just making, sounds with sticks and leaves. And, they have a part where a lady's head gets cracked open. So I was playing with watermelons and almonds, making crunchy, and lasagna snapping.
It's the natural conclusion. I need to crack open a lady's head. We'll get the album. Fine.
I think I made a post on my Instagram at one point, and I was just like, many melons were injured during this film.
Fantastic. And so how does that, for those of you who have worked in Foley before, or worked in Foley in general, how does that work? Do you try and capture all your sound at the same time? Do you go through, what's your process of that? Is it something you're like, I'm going to get all my cracks, all my whooshes, or how do you actually build up on a new project when it comes to Foley?
Yeah, I'm sure everybody has a different process, as I've learned working with many different people along the way. But I spot my session. I tend to do footsteps first. They're the most tedious and annoying, and you start hearing footsteps in your sleep after you do them. So I like to get those out of the way. And then, the clothing. So it's a lot of the easy, easier, not messy stuff. I like to get out of the way first. And then I kind of go, after I have spotted everything, little things like pieces of paper, the pens, like stuff that's just easy to grab, do real quick, tends to check the list of the easy stuff first. And then once you got to bring out the tarp and towels, and you have to get messy. Somebody's throwing up, and you've got to pour soup out and make it sound like, just the messy stuff tends to come last. So.
I feel like how you kind of here comes the difficult part. Get the tarps out. I hate this bit.
Not making a mess in the studio and trying to keep it quiet. Tarps and trash bags are you have to layer the towels down, and it's a mess.
It sounds like a kid's greatest dream. They're like, I do enjoy doing this, but somebody's got to do it.
Yeah.
I need more watermelons. Bring them up.
Yeah.
What about yourself, Phil?
Well, I'm lucky enough to work with Foley artists, some really great people in London. So I tend to work alongside those guys. So a lot of the Foley gets done by them. But what I'll do is I've got my own I've got a vocal booth recording thing in my house here, actually. So I make a list of Foley recordings that are going to need to be a little bit more kind of ultra real, a little bit more enhanced. I think that maybe the Foley guys will do, but then I'll need just another couple of elements that I'd like to add myself. So that's when I'll record my own stuff. So I'll make notes as I go along throughout my first and second pass of the film. So I tend to record my Foley nearer the end of the process, actually. So when I get the Foley from the Foley guys, I'll integrate that into my sound effects session. So I'll just put it in at the bottom, and then have a good sweep through that, and then see what they've done, and then make a decision on if I need to maybe, have a few extra choices for the director. So usually have some stuff lined up. So we'll have, maybe there's a specific thing that they pointed out that they want a sound for. I'll, lay up 3 or 4 different versions, and then I'll mute them, and then just have one playing. And then as that comes up in the mix, they might go, oh, wait a second. And luckily, and then you don't want to be scrabbling around for sounds, you know, halfway through a final mix. So you want to have things, you know, some backups. So it's always good to have 3 or 4 choices, and that's where I'll probably record them myself, maybe. And yeah, just have a variation, really. So yeah, it's great. I love recording my Foley. It's great. So that's a really fun process. And
it'd be quite interesting to you say about kind of being able to have backups there for, you know, if a producer or director's there wanting a different version. It'd be quite interesting to see all of your desktops, to see how well organization is, you know, like to see, I know when I'm looking for files for London Web Fest, I'm like, I need to sort these out one day, and then it's just spreading across the whole of all my folders. How would you say your organization is, you know, when it comes to having a catalog of sound?
You need to be very, very organized. That's all I can say. Yeah, everything named, you know, get into that habit. Everything in folders, everything you can find, the whole process from turnover from the picture editors. So they'll have different turnovers that come in and all that, and all the AAFs and all your guides and everything all need to be well organized so you can recall them up whenever you need to go back. And then my session will always be, my Pro Tools session is always, as organized as I can, really. So you know, it's probably 500 tracks, I think. I max out my Pro Tools session usually, so it's pretty wide. So and then you have a lot of stuff muted, like I was saying. So a lot of stuff as backups, a lot of stuff as just to bring up if you need to, and everything organized in my session. From I'll have sound effects A to G usually, so A, B, C, D, F, G in just sound effects, and within those, each one of those banks, I usually have maybe 6 or 7 monos, 6 or 7 stereos, and then a couple of 5 zeros as well. And that's just the effects, and then all my backgrounds will be on another chunk separate to that. So all the effects will go to its own bus. And then I'll have another backgrounds bus, which is again is A to D usually, and again similar kind of thing, maybe a few less monos, more kind of stereo and 5 zeros for the Atmoses as well. So again, it just organizes everything and it keeps it in your head, and it seems quite intimidating, but you just keep everything. You know, you'll keep all your whooshes in A. You know, you'll keep all your punches in B, you know, and you'll just as in just within a scene, that is. So that changes from scene to scene. I mean, there are people who maybe stick punches on B and keep them there all the time, but I find that personally a bit confusing. So I do it from scene to scene, where you know, you could have punches on E the next scene, but it doesn't matter as long as they're all together. So, and that's where the mixer, because the sound effects mixer hasn't seen your session till, you know, pre-mix, so they've got to get a grip on all your sounds as well pretty quickly, understand what you're doing, and have some kind of logic, because you've only got a few days of them in pre-mix before the final, so they've got to get to grips with it, and you make their life as easy as possible. Because then it just becomes a much more pleasant experience, rather than it being all over the place, and then everyone starts to panic, and you know, and oh, where's that sound? Oh God, and you know, and it's you're in a theatre, the hundreds of pounds an hour they're paying for this, and you know, you don't want to be the one who
you don't want to. Yeah, I think that's the thing in any job. You don't want to be that person who's slowing everybody down.
So you just want to be really organized. So that is top priority.
That's really good to hear, actually, Phil, because like, you know, I've often wondered, like, how does sound design, how does the soundtrack work in feature films? You know, is it like one long, you know, 2-hour Pro Tools session with like 600 tracks, or is it like
well, that literally is it. It's in reels though, so you know, there'll be 15-20 minute reels, and then on every hour, so 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, where each reel starts.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's basically the main layout, and that's just so my session is effects and Foley, and then the music will be is all done by the music guys, so they're a completely separate entity to us. So
yeah,
so they're on the other side of the desk, and then the dialogue guys again are all complete separate entity, and they all do their own thing as well. So there's kind of like the three main teams, as it were, which we all come together at the end. So, but we all communicate and chat and speak throughout the whole process. More myself and the dialogues will speak a lot, and we don't tend to interact with the music that much until the end, really. So, but yeah, we get demos and things along the way, so we can get an idea of what the music's doing. But there's many a time the music just lands on the final mix, and you're just like, I haven't even heard this before, and oh god, we've got to like try and mix this with the effects. Surely my effects clash with the the timpani or something, so you've got to kind of sort that out.
I think there'll be people watching this who, a lot is known about. If you're not in certain, in the business, there's a lot more known about being a director, or especially being in front of the camera, an actor. But the phenomenal amount of work for sound, for audio, for people scoring for each of those departments. I think there might be people watching this as going, I had no idea. Like that information you just provided, Phil, was, I've seen it and I'm overwhelmed by what you're saying. It's just a daunting task, and that's one one person in a larger one cog in a giant machine, all working towards what seems like the impossible if you knew what everybody was doing.
Yeah.
Moving just to Leah and Drew, so both of you co-run your own production companies, or co-run your own studios. So you've got the Lab Studios in London, and Leah, you've got LMP. What similarities and differences do you find? Because obviously you're working on not just film sound design, but you're also, as you've worked on hip hop, you're working on music yourself. What are the similarities between across the board, and what is just wildly different for people who might not know?
Wow, so that's a good question.
It's a big question. I apologize.
It is a big question as well.
If you could just bring it down to a 2-sentence answer, that would be great.
Yeah. Okay.
No,
well, like from my point of view, as a music producer as well, I just like the similarities are, I guess, I love analog synths. So and I've got a quite a big collection. Someone that I used to work with, he used to collect them and just keep them in the studio. So those kind of like Moogs and Korgs and all these like create really interesting wacky sounds, as well as kind of creating really nice bass lines and drone sounds and things like that. So those are the sort of kind of analog machines that I like to use, that I can use in music, and I can also use in kind of creating sound design and soundscapes. But I don't know what's your thoughts, Leah, because you're a musician as well, right?
Yeah, so I guess the question is more or less like what's the difference between creating our own production company versus working with a studio? Is that kind of what you're...
Also just across the kind of like the different, being both a musician, but also doing sound design, also producing for other companies, be it, in different guises. I suppose what's the similarities across, and what is just, not even close?
Yeah, let me think about this for a second. I think... I think working with as many different things, like we were kind of talking about at the beginning, having experience in music, location recording, Foley, sound design, I think it just makes you a better engineer in general, the more that you can touch on those things. And I try to leave my doors open as much as possible and say yes to everything. And, I've kind of like found my niche this past year and a half of okay, I'm good at Foley and people keep hiring me for Foley, and I'm good at sound design. People hire me for sound design. Okay, like maybe this is something I need to pursue and go down. But, you know, especially since I graduated in 2015, I was doing everything. I was trying to get my hands on everything I could possibly do. And, you know, I think becoming a freelancer was a big decision for me because I wanted to still leave some of those doors open. You know, being able to, what am I thinking of? It's like, you know, well, the biggest thing was having a little bit more control over my hours. Hollywood just likes to work people to death. And that was a big factor. And then being able to become a freelancer and, okay, now I can freelance for this studio. I can freelance for this studio. I have, again, a lot more doors open. So that was something that really appealed to me. And yeah, I think the more that you do in everything, it just makes you a better overall engineer. And, you know, I've had location guys approach me and say, oh, what can I do better as a location, you know, recorder and, or boom operator or mixer, and what can I do better to make your job easier? And I'm like, well, why don't you come to the studio and just look at my process? And I love it when location recorders ask me those things, because I think that allows them to get better sound on set, and vice versa. I think really being able to cross those is what makes it better.
you know what's funny, right? Like I think like if I sort of posted this on my social media, and if there's any, you know, anyone that knows me that's watching, that, you know, I reckon there's probably a lot of people out there that'll be like, I didn't know you did sound design, you know, because I'm mainly known from like my music works and my music production, being a musician as well. So, you know, sound design is something that I kind of slip into when the opportunity's there, you know. So if, you know, if there's an opportunity to do some sound design, I'm like, oh, great, you know, I can just, you know, and I just put that hat on and that's it. That's what I do, you know. But a lot of the times the two have crossed over, because I've been asked to also compose, and, you know, because I'm working on kind of smaller, I'm not working on feature films where everyone's, you know, there's a team for every single department. Like I'm literally like, okay, sound, that's it. That's your job. Music, you know, Foley, sound design.
That's just one job, right? That's easy. Yeah.
And you've got to mix it and master it, you know? Yeah. So, yeah. You know, so yeah, so sometimes I have to wear all the hats, and it looks like,
yeah,
definitely makes me better though, for sure. I mean, I think that's kind of how I started out too, is like, well, like just in the beginning working with smaller budget films, they're like, all right, if you don't do this, like, it's probably not going to get done, and then you don't want your work to look bad either, so you're like, all right, well, I guess I'll do it, like.
Yeah, we're talking to last month to, I say that the Q&A was both sides of the lens, but you're talking to people who are, in some cases, director, writer, producer, actor, catering, you know, like that's all just lumped into one job. And it's amazing because it is, you were saying before, Drew, about like jack of all trades, master of none, but it suddenly becomes that thing of, well, no, you're learning how to do this because you are it's right in front of you. If it does, you don't do it, nobody else does. But it's almost, you know, baptism under fire. Just like learn how to do it, or the project doesn't move on. We only have a few minutes left. This hour has gone very, very quickly. Wow. So on a kind of lighter note, Christmas has just gone by, and I suppose figuring out what would have been on your Christmas list of audio gear. So if you could have 3 lists, if there was the things you work with on a daily basis that you would recommend to anybody watching, the things that are on your, you know, Christmas list of like, if only I could have that microphone, if I could only have, you know, and also for anybody who might be starting out, what would you recommend when it comes to kind of equipment, editing software, plugins? Like what would be your recommendations? So anything off those 3 lists.
Right, where'd you start?
Quite a vast world of tech. I mean, that's one thing that you can get caught in the world of buying so much gear that you don't do any work, you know, so it's quite easy to get into that. But I suppose my microphones, I have well, I've got quite a lot of microphones, but my two ones that I just tend to use now, I've got a Sennheiser Ambio, which is an ambisonic microphone, which is relatively small as well. It's around this big, so I can just carry that in my Rycoat, and I take that everywhere with me. I go out recording, so that's for my atmospheres. I record with that, and that is great because it bounces down to stereo 5.1, 7.1 binaural. So you have that, and then I have my Spot microphone, which is for recording sound effects and Foley, which is my Neumann 191. It's a hypercardioid MS microphone. So
that's where we start dribbling.
Yeah. And it just sounds amazing. I mean, they don't make them anymore, but I was so happy I managed to get them. Not cheap, but I managed to get one of those, hands on one of those. So they're my two microphones, and I just have some sound devices, MixPre 6s I use for my portable recorders. So I've got a couple of them, and I've got various other mics as well. But they're the two I just tend to use now, to be honest. So I mean, in recommendations, I'd always say to obviously people on a budget, but just try and spend as much as you can on just get the best microphone you can for what you can afford at that point, because it will last. If it's good enough, you'll always have it and you'll always be able to use it. It's always worth saving up for that better gear than just getting there are some very good cheap microphones now, but I think that's a general rule I would suggest.
And as for editing, for software, like what's out there? I mean, in the world of kind of video editing, DaVinci has changed a lot because it's suddenly free software that, if people had that years ago, to have that on hand as a teenager, someone in their 20s, to have that kind of that level to be able to work to. Is there something similar within the audio world?
Have you got? Well, I just use Pro Tools, so it's the industry standard. So that's kind of, you have to use it. That's you're kind of tied to it.
I'm probably the odd one out here, but I use Logic, and it kind of works for me. It's got good virtual instruments. It's got virtual modules that can create really nice sort of soundscapes and drones and things like that. So there's lots of generators on there as well. So I think if someone's starting out and they want kind of built-in sounds and plugins and things, then Logic's good, Pro Tools is good. There's loads of doors out there that can, I mean, they basically all do the same thing, right? But yeah, I think if anyone's starting out, it's just like build up your sound banks. Just try, get hold of as many, like put the investment into the, if you can't go out and buy really expensive mics and do your own Foley, then go and buy some really decent sound banks, invest in those. I mean, in terms of equipment, I mean, I love keyboards and analog synths and drum machines. So next on my list is an MPC. There's like a new MPC that's come out which integrates really well with my DAW. So that's probably next on my list. I've just invested in some really nice Neumann monitors with a nice sub, so that's really nice for kind of like, it's got such good imaging, and just really, like they're tiny. I mean, they're like, I wish I could show you. They're like literally like that, but the sub, it just gives me everything I need in terms of my frequencies. So if you're starting out for the first time, then I think invest in really good monitors as well, because you really need to hear back your sounds in as much detail as possible.
Yeah, fantastic. And room treatment as well is important.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the software out there that changes your room, especially if you're on a budget. There's SonarWorks I use, which is really great, and that tunes your room, makes it basically gives it a kind of a flat response and takes out all the bass and weird kind of reflections that the room has. It kind of reduces them at least. So I really like that software. That's certainly something I'd recommend for people who have got a, you know, a working from home and don't have a settled proper studio.
Excellent. So I think finishing just on a light question, which is, what film recommendation would you give to people? What sound design blows your mind every time? Like what would be your, if you could recommend one film to just that wows you every time you hear whoever's created it? Has anyone got an answer for that? I mean, I'll be writing this down because normally don't get this advice from this skill set, so it's amazing.
I mean, for me, like if I go to film soundtracks, I mean, this is proper vintage, but and it's probably more for the music as well. But Enter the Dragon is one of my favorite films, and I love it for the reason. Yeah, I love it for the soundtrack, and Lalo Schifrin, the composer on there, is just, you know, he just really, I don't know, he just really captures something in you know, from and I love the way they used to work back then, you know, with the big orchestras, and they'd have, you know, you know, they'd be showing the string, and, you know, they'd be conducting at the same time. I know that's not sound design related, but yeah, I mean, that's just,
it's, you know, whatever audibly just blows your mind.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, that's just, I just love the soundtrack to that movie.
Yeah, I suppose like old classics just always really interest me because they had so little equipment back then and so little, you know, what we have today compared to what they had back then. So, you know, there's loads, of course, but I suppose if it's one like Apocalypse Now is a real classic. And again, just because of the time it was made and what they achieved without Pro Tools, you know, the kind of stuff we have today is quite amazing, really.
Fantastic. And Leo, yourself?
Well, yeah, I love animation, so naturally, I'll probably say it. If I had to pick one, I think I was really blown away with the Spider-Man one, Into the Spider-Verse.
I still have to see this.
It was great.
I don't think I've been recommended a film as many times.
That was amazing.
The villain in there with the octopus and arms and the creation of that sound, I was like, wow, that was really cool. So, and yeah, I recommend that one, and of course any of the Pixar movies, and I think we just saw Soul recently. That was really fantastic, and yeah.
Drew, Leah, Phil, it's been absolutely fantastic to have you. Thank you for taking the time to come on and speak to not only me, but everybody else who will be watching over the coming weeks. If you stick around, I'll chat to you in the green room afterwards. But as everyone at home has now met them, I think it's only right we take another look at the work so you can get a more rounded picture.
Is it Dr. Bradman? Or perhaps one of his less fortunate patients?
Shafata, what did they give you?
I saw this hanging around their house. She said to put it in the corner of the room for protection against the bad spirits.
Bad spirits. Come on, man.
It's interesting, na? कहाँ लगाएंगे? Zara, गाड़ी में मत लेकर. You'll get car sick again.
¿Aló? Sí, buenas. Yo soy el tío de Miranda, de la niña. Estoy llamando porque la niña no ha llamado.
Oye, estaría demasiado orgulloso.
Ah, ¿está trabajando?
No te preocupes por nada, de verdad. Todo perfecto.
Thank you so much for joining us for our London Webfest Q&A today. And thank you to all our guests. I don't know about you, but I've learned a whole lot more than I knew before the start of this panel. Don't forget, you can join us tomorrow at the same time, 9 p.m. GMT, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we'll be talking to international directors, people who are official selections from this month's London Webfest. And if you have a short film, a web series, animation, or any music or dance videos, don't forget you can submit your own work at filmfreeway.com/London Webfest. Thank you again for joining us, and I hopefully will see you tomorrow. Take care.